Ancient China stands as one of history's most powerful and enigmatic civilizations. It's the birthplace of paper, the compass, gunpowder, and profound Eastern philosophies. Deep, unique, and still relevant today. But behind this cultural sophistication lay a different side. Strange, brutal, and at times, absurd. For centuries, traditions and beliefs shaped daily life in ways that now seem almost unimaginable. For nearly 1,000 years, China practiced the intentional deformation of women's feet, known as foot binding. Girls, typically around 5 or 6, had their toes folded under the sole, bones broken, and feet tightly wrapped to prevent growth. The goal was to achieve a length of 7-9 centimeters, creating the distinct golden lotus shape. The process was excruciating. Many girls couldn't walk, suffered constant pain, and some developed gangrene, leading to the loss of toes. The foot structure was permanently altered, leaving women disabled for life. Yet, culturally, this was the norm. Small feet symbolized femininity, obedience, and status. Men of higher classes admired bound feet. Though the feet were hidden, the distinctive gait and demeanor of women with lotus feet were considered especially alluring. The ritual spread nationwide and persisted for centuries. Refusing to bind one's feet often meant a woman would never marry. The emperor's intimate life followed strict protocols. Numerology played a role. 3 symbolized male strength, 9 its amplification, and 27 approached divine order. Thus, the harem was structured. 1 empress, 3 senior consorts, 9 middle consorts, 27 junior consorts, and 81 concubines. Each night, the emperor received a schedule. A woman was selected in advance, bathed, examined, and prepared. Upon entering the chamber, her name and time were recorded. Afterward, officials reported whether intercourse occurred, if ejaculation happened, and whether the ritual was upheld. Special attendants monitored adherence, aware of lunar phases and each encounter's timing. The emperor's body, desires, even his emissions were matters of state importance. In traditional southern Chinese villages, a simple yet shocking waste disposal system existed. The household toilet was positioned directly above a pigsty. People relieved themselves through a hole in the floor, and the pig below consumed everything. This setup, called a pig toilet, was considered practical. No need for cesspools or dealing with odors. The animal handled waste immediately. Pigs were fed kitchen scraps, and feces were just another part of their diet. Later, the pig was slaughtered and eaten. Sanitary standards? They didn't exist. Convenience and zero waste were paramount. For many impoverished peasants, this was a normal aspect of life, not deemed disgusting. Such toilets were common throughout Southeast Asia, especially in poor regions of China, until the mid-20th century. The pig consumed everything, and then it fed the family. Ancient China had a unique class of court officials, eunuchs. They served the emperor, his harem, palace archives, and secret channels of power. Becoming a eunuch wasn't a punishment, but a voluntary act for career advancement. To enter the inner palace, a man had to undergo castration. Without it, he couldn't progress within the empire. Often relatives performed the operation. In poor families, boys aged 8, 12 were castrated in hopes they'd become officials. Some boys died from blood loss. Survivors experienced permanent changes in body and voice. The most capable eunuchs were entrusted with state secrets. During the Ming and Qing dynasties, they wielded such power that ministers feared them more than the emperor himself. A eunuch without a surname could dismiss a man of noble lineage. In ancient China, uttering or writing the emperor's name was forbidden. This practice, known as name taboos, was a strict form of reverence. Violations were treated as political crimes, punishable by death. If a character from the emperor's name appeared in text, it was replaced or omitted. Entire surnames were sometimes changed if they matched part of the monarch's name. People avoided words sounding similar to the emperor's name, even in casual speech. Examples persist in official documents. If the emperor's name was Zhao, the word bright, sharing the same character, was removed from songs, books, and signs. A scribe making a calligraphy error in the emperor's name could be publicly beaten, dismissed, or executed. Thus, the emperor's name became a symbol of power and fear. It belonged solely to him. No one else had the right to utter it fully. In Taoist alchemy, there was a special teaching, Feng Zhong Shu, the art of internal sexual practice. According to it, male energy, yang, diminished with each ejaculation. Female energy, yin, could be absorbed and transformed into life force. To prolong life, a man should sleep with a young girl, preferably a virgin, without ejaculating. Emperors, especially in later dynasties, took these teachings literally. Chronicles describe rulers surrounded by dozens of teenagers, not for pleasure, but for longevity. Some girls weren't engaged in intercourse. They simply slept beside the emperor, touching specific body points to absorb energy. This ritual was called supplementing yang through yin. It was believed that a man achieving perfection could live for hundreds of years. In practice, emperors died young from exhaustion and poisoning, but faith in the power of virgins persisted for centuries. Ancient China had a punishment where a person wasn't just losing a hand, but both hands and feet, turning them into a living warning. This wasn't a side effect, but a deliberate measure. Officially, it was part of the 5 punishment system, until abolished during the Han Dynasty. Hands were cut off for theft, feet for escaping exile, for rebellion or violence, all limbs. The person was tied to a post, and limbs were severed sequentially. Sometimes, the mutilated individual was thrown into a ditch to die. More often, they were left as cripples, serving as a deterrent. Judges didn't just pass sentences. They specified which body parts to amputate. Some criminals lived many years without limbs. They were called formless, and no one was allowed to assist them in public. In ancient China, there was a brutal form of collective punishment called the execution of 9 generations. If someone committed a serious offense against the emperor, like treason, plotting rebellion, or even just criticizing the throne, the punishment didn't stop with them. Their entire family would be targeted. Parents, children, grandchildren, brothers, nephews, uncles, cousins. Sometimes, everyone with the same surname was included. This sentence was most often handed down during political purges. The men were executed. The women were enslaved or sent to the palace as servants. The children were stripped of their name, their rights, and any chance at education. If the head of the family was executed, his house might be burned to the ground, so not even his memory remained. In certain imperial and religious institutions in ancient China, people could be sentenced to complete enforced silence, not by choice, by law. You weren't allowed to speak, ever. This punishment often fell on eunuchs working in the emperor's pure zones, where even the sound of a voice was considered contamination. It could also be imposed on servants who broke the rules, or concubines who were suspected of stepping out of line. Sometimes, the silence was for life. Breaking it meant beatings, exile, or death. The punished person might be forced to wear a wooden sign around their neck that read "No right to speak," so that no one would address them. It wasn't just silence, it was public humiliation. In ancient China, the quest for immortality wasn't just a personal obsession, it was an official mission. Emperors turned to alchemists, Taoist mystics, and outright con men, all promising the same thing: eternal life. Their so-called elixirs of immortality often included mercury, sulfur, mica, and powdered precious metals, especially gold. The most famous case was Qin Shi Huang, China's first emperor. He consumed mercury pills in massive doses, believing they would make him immortal. Instead, they poisoned him. He died while traveling, reportedly delirious from the effects. But he wasn't alone. Heavy metal poisoning caused seizures, paranoia, hair loss, and internal bleeding. But those symptoms were seen as spiritual purification. The worse it got, the closer they believed they were to transformation. They thought gold was incorruptible, and that meant it could pass its immortality onto the body. So, emperors literally died drinking liquid metal, and no one dared stop them. Among China's rural poor, especially in ancient times, lice were just part of life. People lived in cramped conditions, rarely bathed, and wore the same clothes for weeks. Lice were everywhere. Some folks would pop lice directly on their bodies, and sometimes they'd eat them. This behavior is documented in both travelogues and old Chinese ethnographic records. It wasn't common everywhere, but in certain areas, people believed that eating the lice closed the cycle, returning the parasite to the body so it wouldn't jump to someone else. To them, it was a primitive way of preventing further infection. Gross? Yes, but it made sense in the world they lived in. China had a tradition called ghost marriage, a posthumous wedding. It happened when someone died unmarried, and the family feared their soul would be lonely in the afterlife. To prevent this, the dead person would be married, either to another deceased individual or, in some cases, to someone still alive. If a young man died, his family might search for a recently deceased woman. The two families would exchange symbolic gifts, hold a ritual, and place wedding figurines by the coffin. If no female body was available, a wax doll or wooden plaque with a name might be used. In some cases, a living woman was married off to a dead man, especially if he came from a wealthy family. Her parents received a bride price, but the woman remained a widow for life. She wasn't allowed to remarry or have children. Her role was to serve the spirit of her late husband. In remote parts of China, especially in isolated mountain villages, there was a tradition of extreme hospitality. If a traveler came to your home, you didn't just feed him and give him a bed. You offered him your wife for the night. This wasn't seen as degrading. On the contrary, it was an honor. The host was sharing what he valued most. The more important the guest, the more honored the gesture. Turning it down? That was an insult. The woman too was expected to comply. Tradition outranked personal feelings. Sometimes it wasn't the wife, but a younger sister, a servant, or even a widow, and it wasn't considered adultery. In fact, if the guest left a gift, it raised the family's standing in the community. In Imperial China, especially under the Qing dynasty, long fingernails weren't just a fashion choice, they were a status symbol. The longer the nail, the higher your rank. Long nails proved you didn't work with your hands. You commanded others, you gave orders. You lived in shade while others labored in the sun. Men of noble birth grew out their pinky nails, sometimes 4 to 6 inches long. Women often had multiple long nails. They wore elaborate nail guards made of gold, silver, or jade, not just for decoration, but to protect those fragile symbols of rank. Of course, they couldn't eat, dress, or even scratch themselves. Servants had to do it for them. Power and helplessness existed in the same body, and that was completely normal. If a nail broke, it was a disgrace. Records describe officials hiding their hands in their sleeves if a nail was too short. Without their nails, they looked like commoners, and that was unacceptable. In some periods of ancient China, government officials were expected to begin their reports to the emperor by physically punishing themselves. It wasn't considered torture. It was a ritual of humility. The official would kneel, bow his head, and start hitting himself. Sometimes it was slaps to the face or chest. In more serious cases, he'd bring a wooden stick and beat his own back or shoulders before saying a word. The idea was to show absolute respect. To say, "I'm not worthy to speak in front of the Son of Heaven." If the report contained bad news or criticism, the beating had to be harder. Officials would even show up with fresh bruises or bandages on their heads to prove they had prepared properly. In ancient China, urine wasn't considered just waste. It was believed to carry leftover life energy from the body, especially in children. People thought it had healing and even rejuvenating powers. Young boys' urine was considered the purest. It was used in traditional medicine, home remedies, and even beauty treatments. People would gargle with it for sore throats, use it on burns or infections, and women in royal courts washed their faces with it to preserve youth. But some regions took it even further. In the Zhejiang province, there was a long-standing tradition of cooking eggs in boys' urine. It was a seasonal dish known as spring eggs. Schools would collect urine in buckets. The eggs were soaked and boiled in it all day long. People believed these eggs helped with kidney health and joint pain. It wasn't considered strange. It was seen as natural medicine. And incredibly, some communities still practice this tradition today. One of the most permanent punishments in ancient China was facial branding. It was called moxing. A symbol or character was burned into a person's face using a red-hot knife or metal stamp. This wasn't just a mark. It was a lifelong sentence. People were branded for crimes like theft, tax evasion, lying to officials, or escaping from punishment. The symbol could be placed on the forehead, cheek, or under the eye, and would say things like thief, traitor, or runaway. Even after completing their sentence, these people were never accepted back into society. Most couldn't get jobs. They weren't allowed to sit with others at meals. In markets, people avoided them. For women, being branded meant no one would ever marry them. Their lives were over, socially and economically. Facial branding began to fade out during the Tang Dynasty's legal reforms, but in poorer provinces, it continued for centuries afterward. Long before vaccines were developed, the Chinese had already come up with a method to protect children from smallpox. It was called variolation. Here's how it worked. Scabs were taken from someone who had already survived smallpox. The scabs were dried, ground into a fine powder, and either blown into a healthy child's nose or rubbed into a small cut on the arm. The goal was to cause a very mild infection. If the child got through it, they were usually immune for life. It wasn't risk-free. Some kids got sick and died, but most of them survived, and the method worked. This practice dates back to the 10th or 11th century in China. That's hundreds of years before vaccines appeared in Europe. It was used at royal courts, in the army, and among the nobility. Smallpox was deadly, and stopping it was seen as a national priority. During the early dynasties of China, especially under the Shang, human sacrifice was a regular part of religious life. These weren't hidden rituals, they were public and state-sanctioned. Victims were often prisoners of war, slaves, servants, or concubines. They were offered to the gods of the earth, sky, war, or to the spirits of royal ancestors. Archaeologists have found mass graves with rows of bodies carefully arranged, showing no signs of resistance. Many had skull fractures or broken limbs. Some were buried alive. In Jiaotun, the capital of the Shang dynasty, there are still pits where the remains of sacrificed individuals can be seen today. These sacrifices were believed to bring cosmic balance and protect the dynasty. For the rulers, they weren't acts of cruelty, they were a sacred duty. Torture was common throughout the ancient world, but in China, it reached an entirely new level, both in scale and in cruelty. People weren't just torturing convicted criminals. Suspects, witnesses, officials, women, even children. Anyone could end up being tortured, depending on the case and the will of the authorities. For example, during the Tang Dynasty, torture was actually a formal part of legal investigations. Without it, confessions weren't considered valid. And if someone was found guilty of especially serious crimes, like treason, rebellion, or blasphemy, they could face some of the most terrifying forms of execution ever devised. One of the worst was being sawed in half. The victim was hung upside down by their feet. That way, the blood rushed to their head and kept them conscious longer. Then, the executioners began, slowly sawing the body in two, starting at the groin and working their way down through the pelvis, stomach, and chest. It was always done by two people, taking their time, to make the pain last as long as possible. The most horrifying part was that the heart could keep beating even after the saw had reached the belly. The victim might remain fully conscious all the way until the blade cut through the diaphragm. The history of ancient China isn't just about emperors and inventions. It's also about real people living under customs and beliefs that shaped every part of their lives. Some of these practices are gone now. Others still echo in parts of culture, tradition, or collective memory. If you found this video interesting, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And check out our other videos where we explore the darkest and most unusual chapters of human history.